This guy is far too great of a miracle worker for someone we know next to nothing about. Hello my siblings in Christ, before I start this video I want to say right from the get-go that there's not a whole lot to talk about these two saints. While writing the script I removed a lot of fluff and there was very little substance. There's a lot of tradition of Saint Anna being holy, but very few specifics, and we probably wouldn't know what little we know of Saint Basil if he weren't such a miracle spammer. In fact, the Holy Synod of the Serbian Orthodox Church canonized Saint Anna right while I was writing the script to this, so I will focus a bit more on her as well. On December 28, 1610, in the tiny village of Mrkonjići in Herzegovina, baby Stoyan Jovanović, our future saint, is born into the world. His parents, Petar and Anna, are your classic devout Orthodox couple. Legend has it that young Stoyan was so kind-hearted that he'd give away his lunch to poor kids while herding cattle in the hills. He was never the one to indulge in games with the other boys. Saint Anna taught her little boy all the prayers, and she fervently prayed that God would protect her son from forced Islamization. Not wanting their kid to become an Ottoman poster boy, his parents whisked him away to Zavala Monastery, where his uncle, here among seraphim, was the abbot. At Zavala, Stoyan soaked up the Holy Scriptures faster than a sponge in a baptistry, as we say here in Serbia. We don't actually say it, I just like how it sounds. Afterward, they sent him to the monastery of the Dormition in Trebinje, where he became a monk, exchanging his name Stoyan for the name Basil. He leveled up to deacon, then presbyter, and before he knew it, he was an archimandrite, which is basically the monk equivalent of getting a corner office. Now guys, having a guardian angel can get pricey. They can be very expensive to feed. But if you pledge on Patreon, you can help this angel survive. Pledge now! By 1638, against his will, because he maxed out his humility, Basil was consecrated as the Metropolitan of Western Herzegovina. He was stationed at Turdosh Monastery, shielding his flock from Turkish cruelty and sneaky Catholic missionaries trying to poach his congregation. But when the Turks torched Tvrdosh, Saint Basil packed up his 30-monk family and fled to Ostrog, a cliffside monastery. There, he lived in a cave, prayed a whole lot, and was absolutely a holy terror to demons. There he lived for 15 years, remodeling the place and building the Church of the Holy Cross in the cave where Saint Isaiah of Onogosht lived. On April 29, 1671, Saint Basil passed away peacefully in his cave cell. Now you're probably wondering, where are the miracles, the good stuff, the flashy things? A whole lot of moving around and no supernatural phenomena. Well, that's the thing. While Saint Basil was considered a saint by his flock, which he faithfully served, there are next to no records of miracles. However, that is about to change. But before that, let's take a moment to pray for all of these wonderful people who made this video possible. Okay, the moment's over. When Saint Basil died, his room lit up with an unearthly glow. The monks buried him under the Church of the Presentation, but 7 years later he appeared in a dream to Abbot Raphael, asking him to dig up his relics. The good abbot, mindful of the devil's tricks, ignored the dream. The same dream repeated itself 3 times, and on the third appearance, Saint Basil had enough. He started censing the abbot and stuck him with a blazing hot censer directly in the face. Upon waking, Raphael saw that his forehead was singed, so he and his monks unearthed Basil's body, which was incorrupt and smelled like basil leaves. Now, in Serbian, Basil's name is Vasilije, and basil, the plant, is called bosiljak, so the two words really sound nothing alike, but at least in English, you can immediately understand God's little pun. His relics were placed in a reliquary, and that is when the pilgrims started to flood the monastery gates. Not that they were disappointed. The miracles really started to ramp up. Christians, Catholics, and even Muslims flocked to his relics. Saint Basil is so popular in Montenegro that people often swear by his name, and God forbid you break an oath made in Saint Basil's name, or the place of his dwelling, the Ostrog Monastery. Speaking of Ostrog, just look at this thing. I didn't want to draw it because you'd be at a loss of just how amazingly beautiful it is. It is in a vertical rock. One more thing Montenegrins like to do is, when mentioning Saint Basil, is to say glory to him and mercy. Now, the clergy is really trying to root out this custom, because Basil, not being God, should be thanked but not glorified, and he, being saint, already obtained God's mercy. But the custom proceeds like a Cujo infestation. What of Saint Anna? Where are her relics? Well, that's one more miracle I want to report on. For the longest time, the graveyard of her burial was known, but not the specific gravesite. However, nearly 100 years ago, a certain Tripko Milutinović was passing the church and the adjacent graveyard. There he saw a certain monk, definitely not an apparition, who casually told Trpko that the grave of Saint Anna is a number of steps diagonally to the church corner. The monk then disappeared. Trpko made a cross to mark the spot, but in 1941 he was murdered and thrown into a pit by the fascist forces. In 2023, her relics were finally unearthed. They were located underneath another skeleton, which was black in color, and the bones crumbled to the touch. However, the bones of Saint Anna were practically wholly preserved, yellow in color, which is one of the signs of holiness. Her hands were crossed on her chest, most probably an indication that she was buried by her pious son. One more local tradition proved true when her relics were uncovered, that she was tall, 6 feet to be precise. If you like wonderworking bishops, then I highly suggest you watch this video on St. Nectarius next. Bye!